FX's Shogun concluded on April 23rd. It's a historical fiction piece based on James Clavell's book from 1975 that details the events of Japan's Civil War, something I've been covering and learning about through my Decades Challenge. This show was exciting not only because I may or may not be a weeb, but also because it visualized a story I've only understood through text. It's a story about betrayal and redemption, but also a reflection of modern politics, Japanese and Western. These traditions that hold together a society have a place, but there's a pain behind the order. Seppuku, a woman's place, political roles, they all intertwine in this messy way. It teaches us about this period, but also about ourselves, our perspective of the East, Orientalism, the performance of its politeness, and the cycle of fate we are doomed to perpetuate. Our story follows a myriad of characters, Toranaga, Mariko, and John Blackthorne, or Anjin-sama. They each teach us a different side, give us more context of this world we are stepping into. Toranaga is the politics of this civil war, the glue that eventually binds Japan. Mariko illustrates just how depressing it was to be a woman during this time. Blackthorne is the interesting one for me personally. I agree with the assessment that he's an incredibly mid character, but he's also a great character to have. It's very easy when making these kinds of shows to veer too far into the white savior trope. Shogun does a really good job of not stepping into that territory. I think it helps that he was an actual person and not just a random addition, but also he acts as our lens. He is us. We are the Anjin or barbarian walking into this political mess, and it's only through his eyes that we learn to understand it. I want to explore this beautiful show and analyze the messages within it. I definitely didn't just want an excuse to talk about this show. Definitely. It has been so long since I've actually enjoyed a scripted TV show, okay? I need to take advantage of this fleeting moment, materialize my love for the show one last time. It feels like a funeral, okay? I'm grieving. Let me grieve. There will be spoilers from here on out, so if you haven't finished the show or want to watch it, this is your warning. Also, before we get into it, subscribe. I also have TikTok, Instagram, Patreon, where you can see exclusive outlines, scripts, video drafts, all of that is on there. First, we'll start off by following Mariko, the other woman in the story, and the theme of manipulation of fate. Mariko is my favorite character, hands down. She's such a compelling character who only gets better as the story develops. She's based on Hosokawa Garcia, a real-life noblewoman and Christian convert. In the story, she is the daughter of Akechi Jinsai, a man who was put to death and forced to kill his family after assassinating Nobuhisa. She narrowly escapes death after being married off to Bontaro, an abusive, angry piece of shit. There's also a lot of depression and pain behind these events that we'll discuss later, but her story helps set the tone for the rest of the women in the series. One of the main events the story opens with is the death of Fuji's baby and her husband. Her husband offers to end his family line after disrespecting the main op, Ishido-sama. To avoid further bloodshed, he leaves Fuji-sama a widow and a grieving mother. This really shifted my perspective on seppuku. I don't know why, but I foolishly believed that everyone in Japan just accepted this tradition. I think when reading about it and even learning how it was used in a modern lens, it's easy to flatten the impact of this tradition. But of course, when your entire family line gets wiped out, you're gonna grieve over that. I think you can also attribute the flatness of seppuku to the way everyone around Fuji tells her to just move on and that it's necessary. Seppuku is a tradition that is viewed as honorable. It's not the first of its kind. There are many examples of death being viewed in cultures as honorable and necessary, a gift to the gods. However, removing the grief flattens the human experience. Then amid this lack of grief and emotion, Fuji is given the role as the consort of John Blackthorne. This isn't a role that she chooses and initially opposes it. It illustrates that your role as a woman isn't chosen by you. While she doesn't want to serve an English barbarian and at times hates being in this position, she also receives this unfamiliar kindness from Blackthorne, and since he plays a vital role in restoring Toranaga as the shogun, ultimately she serves her country in some backward way. So it's conflicting. There's good and bad in her story. She has no choice over her entire life. Her purpose is chosen by the men around her. But this new position does end up doing what they said it would do, serving her lord. Fuji is also one of my favorite characters. She's incredibly charming and funny. She goes completely MIA for like 3 episodes, which makes me sad, but in her expressions are what really makes the show, especially amidst the murder and chaos. It's good to laugh a little. The ladies of the Willow World aren't noblewomen but courtesans, some of the most sought after but abhorred people in society. They introduce the idea of performance. Every other character honestly does as well. Buntaro's tea performance from Mariko, the performance of politeness, but especially sex work. Sex work is obviously a form of entertainment and a valid profession, but it completely blew my mind watching the scene where Blackthorn goes to the Willow World. Lady Kiku does this beautiful performance where she pours the tea and kind of deepens this broken connection between Mariko and Blackthorn. It is because of this level of performance that Kiku is the most popular courtesan in the area, something her bitch-ass boyfriend can't appreciate. Like, if you can't take the heat, get out! He's hella annoying, a major manipulator, just like his uncle. Doesn't deserve my girl. This concept of necessary performance is only elevated in a stick of time when the owner of the Willow Ward, Jin, speaks with Toranaga. In her negotiation with Mariko before Blackthorn visits, she comes off as pretentious and maybe a bit manipulative, but her conversation with Toranaga contextualizes her character. She grew up in a gutter, was raised dirt poor, but built an empire for herself out of nothing. She, Kiku, and the other courtesans may have lives that are looked down upon or are only built to serve other people, to participate in this performance, but within that is a fate that is they manipulated in their own self-interest. Fate is like a sword, useful to only those who can wield it. A very poignant quote from Jin herself. The entire scene is her wielding that fate for herself, looking beyond the senseless violence and towards the future. She convinces Toranaga, who seems as if he's about to give up, to grant her a plot of land. There is this beautiful and kind of humorous comparison and reaction as the Portuguese are also granted land right next to the courtesans, something they are not happy about. Within the mud, they see nothing. It looks worthless. How could we build something from this? But Jin and Kiku see promise. They see a dream. They have already built something from nothing and will happily do it again. God, I love this show. Lady Ochiba is a character that we don't really properly get introduced to until about a third of the way in. We see her in the corner, creepily glaring at Toranaga in the 2nd episode, but she is purely a shadow at that point. She hasn't awakened yet. When she does, she wields her fate and realizes her true power. She's the mother of the heir to the Taiko, the former head of Japan. We will discuss the politics in more depth later, but essentially the Taiko's wife couldn't produce an heir, so she stepped in as Ochiba no Kata to fulfill that duty. She doesn't discuss in detail, but does mention, "You don't know what I had to do to produce an heir." And I can only imagine the trauma of having this old man lay on top of you day and night. But also, of course, the pressure to produce a child. I mean, that is her only purpose. If she doesn't do that, she fails. This pressure isn't new either. It's one that we as the audience can understand. We know the historical context and pain behind a woman's purpose being boiled down to what she can give a man. Now, having fulfilled that duty, she uses her status to her political advantage. She's the daughter of Nobuhisa, or the historical figure Nobunaga, someone who is credited as one of the saviors of Japan. She believes that Mariko's father and Toranaga plotted against Nobuhisa to gain political prominence. I wasn't aware of this drama between two very important figures in Japanese history. It's kind of cool to learn about, and once again really contextualizes these historical figures I've only read about. She intends to use this newfound power to get revenge on Toranaga. But there's a conflict of interest. Her childhood best friend, Mariko, serves the very man she wants to kill. Through flashbacks, we get a mild sense of how close they were, this sisterly-like relationship, this bond they thought can never be broken. But between their father's feud and being separated in their adulthood, that inevitably changes. It's not until the 9th episode that they see each other face to face again. They both are entirely different. They have different motives, different lives. They've been shaped by their trauma and this necessary fate they've had to cultivate. Different is the apt description. However, they still feel the remnants of what they once had. When they meet face to face again, Ochiba is trying to reason with Mariko to not kill herself. After not being able to fulfill her duty to her lord, Mariko proclaims she will commit seppuku, and reasonably Ochiba, as her childhood best friend, doesn't want to lose someone else. They are on conflicting sides, but through this conversation they're able to break down these walls, be vulnerable in the way they haven't been in so long, stop the performance, even if for a brief moment. Ochiba is a complex character shrouded in regret and pain who resorts to manipulation to receive what she wants. As she finds herself deeper in this mess she's created, she shows great vulnerability, that her actions are the results of the pain she's endured. Now we can circle back to Mariko, the ambassador or main figure of this story of pain. She has a forbidden romance with another main character, Blackthorn, but she is so much more than a damsel or vehicle for a romance plot. A sentiment that really defines Mariko's character and many of the other women in the series as well is the eightfold fence. Mariko describes to Blackthorn that one thing children are taught is to build this impenetrable wall to retreat to whenever needed. You see her retreat behind this wall many times after her husband Bontaro beats her amidst this conflict between her and Blackthorn, and even after the death of her family. Throughout the entire series, she wants to avenge her family by committing seppuku and joining them in the afterlife. Every year on the anniversary of her family's death, she asked her husband for permission to do this, but is denied the opportunity. And one of my favorite scenes, the tea scene that I mentioned earlier, Buntaro finally allows her this opportunity, this time offering to join her as well. He only offers this because he feels his great defeat amidst this waging war. To him and many others, there isn't a way out. It's kind of selfish and completely misses the point of why she wants to do it in the first place. In the past, she's also mentioned that she gives people what they merit, and Buntaro, especially after beating her, doesn't deserve her hate and definitely doesn't deserve to join her in the afterlife. Buntaro acts as this great foil to Blackthorn, who can't fully understand Mariko but offers her a great sense of humanity she's never received before. In a beautiful scene at the hot springs in one of the early episodes, instead of retreating behind this wall in her mind, she openly daydreams as she and Blackthorn imagine this date in London. He talks about all the places he would take her, and it's this beautiful moment where she can openly imagine, as if she were a child, this impossible scenario, rather than retreating further into herself. That is what Blackthorn offers her. That scene illustrates it all. As an Englishman, his main journey is coming to terms with Japanese customs, and he can never quite fully accept them. This influences his relationship with Mariko. He doesn't completely understand her and often imposes his own judgments on her. After Buntaro beats her, she retreats to the cliffside where Blackthorn finds her. He doesn't understand why she doesn't just leave him. This is where she talks about Buntaro not even meriting her hate, so on and so forth, as well as in episode 9 asking her to live even if just for him. Once again, really selfish, and proves he still doesn't understand the significance of the moment and of the concept of seppuku. The sentiment from the hot spring scene prevails despite these hiccups though. We get a spicy sexo scene. The simplicity of the way it's shot, the mystery is so much more invigorating than a full-blown sex scene. There's also the seppuku scene where they debate you into thinking she's gonna die. I was nervous that entire episode. It's honestly messed up that they make you think she's okay and then she dies anyways. Like, that is messed up. The Blackthorn asked to second her, and as Anna Sawai states in a Cosmopolitan interview, it's the most romantic thing he could ever have done. Both of them are Christians. She's a Catholic, he's a Protestant. It is totally against the religion to do anything close to that. Yet he's willing to allow her to have a peaceful death, to die without the sin of killing herself. He's dying a good Catholic and a loyal samurai. It's the biggest gesture that he could do. It's this moment where he puts aside his disagreement with Japanese customs and puts his love for her first. Beyond the Blackthorn scene, this episode is incredibly important for Mariko's story. Everything comes full circle for her, and similar to Fuji, Toranaga's plan allows her to not only serve her country, but to avenge her family. Her defiance of Ishido, that scene is so incredible. She's such a badass, and then when she fights the guards, probably the best episode because it's just fully Mariko. In this episode, all the confusion and pain she's felt for years finally makes sense. There is finally a place to let it rest. In a moment that I'm still grieving to this day, Mariko's story ends as she risked her life to protect Blackthorn and the others from an explosion caused by Ishido's camp. Words cannot describe how exceptional this woman is, and she's not even real. As I stated before, Blackthorn is a mid character at times. Compared to goated characters like Mariko and Toranaga, even Yabushige and the more insignificant villains outshine him. But what Blackthorn represents, the role he plays, is so compelling and necessary. Open by saying that Blackthorn is our eyes. We are walking to the middle of this situation just like him, and it's only through him that we can begin to understand it. We will always be an Anjin though. We will never fully understand this world, no matter how hard we try. He lands in Japan after months on the grueling sea, starving, and the crewmate who killed himself. Little hope, and instantly it's this mash of racism and ignorance that's very humorous. I don't know why, but I think that's kind of what wrote me into the series. Mostly the anti-white racism was just so exceptional, seeing them go back and forth, calling each other barbarians. But this is Blackthorn's starting point. He has no semblance of understanding of them whatsoever. It begins the most intriguing part of the story, him learning to grasp the world he's been thrown into. He's extremely reluctant at first, but along the way, he slowly learns the basics of Japanese customs. He learns the language, how to bow, how to eat properly, and how and when to speak. He slowly but surely becomes ingrained in the culture without even realizing it. This is illustrated in a very important scene where Blackthorn, after hollering and kicking for his men and his ship, finally is reunited with them. However, neither of the parties can welcome each other with open arms. They both openly resent each other and what they've become. Blackthorn smells the stench of the Englishman, and his crewmate can't comprehend how much of them he's become. Yet Blackthorn is in this weird limbo. He's too ingrained in Japanese culture to go back to his men, and too English to fully accept Japan. One of the hardest things he struggles to grasp is the Japanese view of death. From a Western standpoint, it is unimaginable to wield death as a vehicle of honor. To us, death is scary. It's something we fight. It's definitely something Blackthorn fights throughout the series. Why would you especially have a suicide culture? That's a terrifying prospect for Westerners. But there are a couple of key moments when Blackthorn is forced to confront this concept. There's a scene, I believe, in the first episode when Yabushige is egged on by Blackthorn to save a Portuguese sailor. I forget his name. The waves kick up and knock him out, forcing the others to go and find help. They throw down the rope, and as Yabushige is fighting for his life, he's faced with a dilemma that is very simple for him. Die to the waves or control your own fate. He takes out the blade and prepares to commit seppuku before he is saved. Blackthorn is in awe at this moment. He's just witnessed a man at a vulnerable point decide to take his own life. He gains a great sense of respect for Yabu after this moment. However, contrast this moment with the gardener incident. Blackthorn hangs up this bird and he claims it needs to be fermented before you can cook it or something. And he, not knowing how to speak the language, says, take it down, you die. It only goes downhill from there. Uji and the maids are forced to cook and then throw out this rank stew, and then the next day when Blackthorn is away begging Mariko to leave Buntaro for her own sanity, Uji carries out her lord's rules. He comes back and the bird is gone, and so is his gardener. The scene's impact is set up by a sweet moment shared between them that morning in the garden. Just when Blackthorn is beginning to settle into this house he's been given, understanding the sanctity of the garden, of the customs, he is snapped back into the reality when Fuji kills the gardener for defying the rules, taking down the bird. It's another foil or contrast in the show, the honor and death, and also its unyielding terms. Just his words alone were enough to kill this innocent man over a bird. You, along with Blackthorn, are like, that's a little insane, isn't it? You begin to spiral with him as you realize just how far these customs go, the beauty as well as the harm. The entire argument of this video, wow, we've gone full circle. As an American who has admired Japanese customs, the perceived selflessness of them, this is an outsider looking in. I've never been to Japan. This was crazy for me. Of course, they don't go this far in Japan anymore, but through this scene, I realized just how unwavering Japanese traditions and customs were. how extreme they were. We as the audience with a similar Western understanding as Blackthorn begin to second guess where we have found ourselves. As the series comes to a close, so does this cycle of death. Everything comes full circle. The final episode hosts this beautiful scene where Fuji and Blackthorn finally meet after episodes of not seeing each other. There has been conflict between them and hardship in communicating, but they still find a way to speak with one another. Blackthorn then shares a piece of his culture with her, giving her one last gift before she leaves to become a nun. Together they receive closure from the ones they've lost as they sink their remnants into the sea. Absolutely gorgeous scene. This cyclical nature of death and life perfectly ties everything together and rounds out Blackthorn's story. There's the pain of their loved ones being gone, but also the closure and peace, knowing they didn't die in vain. Shogun's main plot point obviously surrounds Toranaga and his quest to achieve the namesake of the show. I equate the mastery of Shogun's writing to the One Piece effect. It's not exclusive to One Piece at all, but it's an example that this audience will understand. From the moment you start watching the show, you know what will happen at the end. You know Toranaga will be the Shogun, just like you know Luffy will see the One Piece. It's not about the destination, it's about the journey, and the journey is insane. For most of the show, a win for Toranaga seems impossible. His army was decimated by an earthquake, his brother betrayed him, yet we sit in awe as Toranaga demonstrates militant mastery. His tactics are mostly psychological, manipulation of emotions, tearing apart relationships, and very little bloodshed. And if there is bloodshed, it is calculated or a last resort. Nobody shapes the wind to their will better than Toranaga. In the third episode, we get a glimpse of this trickery he is so well known for. He, as well as his constituents, leave Osaka despite orders from the council to stay, by disguising this mission as Lady Shizu and Lady Kiri leaving, as well as switching these two out secretly for Toranaga. They successfully leave the castle. It's not long before Lord Kiyama's camp figures out the trick and attempts to stop them, but it's too late. Toranaga is too goated. He also famously won his first battle at the age of 12, which is like psychotic, and at the end of the season, we saw one of the most heartbreaking examples of just how far Toranaga is willing to go to achieve victory. He convinced the council members that he is genuinely giving up, and Hiyomatsu, his right-hand man, stage a conflict between them. At this meeting where everyone is supposed to pledge loyalty to their lord and forfeit, they rightfully fight back against this notion. Hiromatsu pretends as if he disagrees and states he will commit seppuku in protest. And he does, his son Buntaro seconding him. It's such a heartbreaking moment when, in the subsequent scene, you realize it was all a ruse and Hiromatsu committed the ultimate sacrifice for the cause. The amount of emotions and grief I felt in these last few episodes was so overwhelming, but shows just how good the writers were, just how immersive the story was that you got lost in it. Emotions ran high amidst the war, and Toranaga used that to his advantage. First with Blackthorn, who drove a wedge between the council for his outspoken hatred of the Portuguese Catholics. Lord Kiyama used his faith as a political pawn. No ounce of him cared. But him being aligned with the church, he couldn't just let a heretic live. Opportunities landed at Toranaga's feet often, and he was quick to capitalize on them. His son's death, as messed up as it sounds, allowed him some time. He was granted a mourning period after his dumbass kid slipped and fell on a rock. An incredibly apt death for this stupid character, but this bought him time. Time to plot and plan his next move, Hiromatsu's death, and then Mariko's. Mariko's protests at the castle caused an uproar among the civilians being held captive, and her childhood best friend who turned her army against Ishido after Mariko's death. Similar to Blackthorn and Fuji's scene at the sea, Toranaga's story came to a satisfying close. It was on a cliff with Yabushige as they shared a strangely casual conversation. Prior to his head getting cut off, Yabushige wanted some questions answered. He didn't get them all, but the ones he did brought some clarity to the existing dynamic. What about the barbarian? He asked. Well, Blackthorn is just a pet. He was just a wild beast to tame. Momentary entertainment. I once again love this framing around Blackthorn because I feel like in any other story he would be presented as this savior of the land, this surprisingly loyal soldier. But Toranaga's view of him loops back around to when we first met him, all muddy, starved, and disgusting. I'm sure he does value Blackthorn, though. As I mentioned, he bought him time, split the council in half, saved him from an earthquake. So he may be a little bit more than a pet, whether or not Toranaga wants to admit that. My favorite revelation, though, is when Jabushige calls Toranaga a hypocrite, which he is. I mean, him becoming shogun would defy his duty to the heir, what he promised to Taiko on his deathbed. Toranaga is just as deceptive, if not more so, than his enemies. He manipulates their emotions and actions like they're mere puppets. It's patronizing. Another example of really good writing. I'm sure Ieyasu, the figure Toranaga is based on, wasn't infallible. From what I read about the Edo period, despite being viewed as this time of peace, it was actually pretty restrictive. It brought strict, heavily Confucius rule, which harmed the lives of women and the lower class. It's a pretty fair representation of him. Toranaga at times enacts senseless violence, like in the last episode when he beheads people to prove a point to Blackthorn. I mean, that was kind of psychopathic. It adds so much depth to his character, though, that wouldn't exist without it. We are finally awarded with this beautiful story of how Toranaga will win the war. This view into the future. This glimpse offers us this view of a masterful victory on the Green Hills. Edo will become the capital and a hub of prosperity. He did always hate Osaka. It's only fitting. We then return to reality, vindicated, the bloodshed and sacrifice over, and he slices the traitor's neck, closing this exceptional story. Fate and tradition, the pain but also the power they wield, is something we will always feel. Humanity is destined to be stuck perpetually in this cycle. To ground ourselves back in the present moment, fate and tradition are more prevalent than ever. When we look at Japan, this is a country that is famous for being collectively stuck in its ways. There are many societal markers they refuse to cross, the main one off the top of my head being LGBTQ rights. This is a community that has had to hide in fear of judgment and prosecution from the older majority. We can thank America for that one. Becoming a hyper-capitalist state definitely doesn't help with that dilemma. But we also see them fight against this stubbornness to hold on to their past ways. There have recently been beautiful pro-Palestinian protests, and even during 2020 there were BLM protests. Some of the time-old traditions and customs of politeness and collectivism I fawn over, but some need to be re-examined. I'm hopeful that the Japanese youth will break out of their predecessors' incessant cycle and wield their own fate. Whatever that looks like, I'm sure it'll be beautiful. If we apply these themes to the West, though, I'm not as hopeful. Since I'm not fully ingrained in Japanese politics, I can only go off the information I've read and seen, but I'm very familiar with the West game. I was born in the darkness. You're the main perpetuators of violence globally, and it pains me to see us repeat history so blatantly. The recent college protests remind me of Kent State during Vietnam, and this genocide we are funding reminds me of the Native American genocide, the South African apartheid, the emancipation movement for slaves in the South, the Holocaust. I could keep going. There's no better example of utterly perpetuating her foolish mistakes and dwelling in the past than us. We are that personified. Even now, when it comes to Palestine, it's almost like October 7th all over again. We're having to explain these elementary concepts again. It's tiring. It feels like we are in the middle of Toranaga's fight. His brother has just betrayed him. His stupid son split his head on a rock. This fight seems impossible. If anything, the story is a perfect allegory to what the world is facing now, this seemingly impossible task. We can only hope that our prediction of the end is as clear as Toranaga's. My words, no matter how flowery I make them, can't possibly do this story justice. This is genuinely the best show I've probably ever watched. The writing, the characters, it immersed you, grabbed you by the balls, demanded you look in the eyes. It felt like I was there in Sengoku, Japan, watching as the story unfolded. I swear I could feel the cold breeze, the same breeze Blackthorn was feeling. It was a worthwhile distraction that I thoroughly enjoyed while it lasted. Thank you so much, firstly to my members, Patreon and YouTube alike, for supporting the work I do. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Okay, bye.